only have one friend from seminary with whom I've regularly stayed in contact over the generations. We don't see each other very often, but when we do, it is a loud and long meeting, and our phone calls rarely clock in anywhere under either 60 minutes or 60 decibels. Charles often says that we fought for our friendship, and the word fought is crucial to that understanding. As a young white man from rural Kentucky, Charles felt that there were just an awful lot of things about racism that I needed to learn from his urban Atlanta black experience. Charles was not always a patient teacher, and the lessons were often adorned with very colorful language. But I believe that over the years we finally got there. But a couple of decades ago, the shoe shifted to the other foot. When Charles heard some of my messages about gay rights and the ordination of homosexuals, we discovered that he had another huge issue that he needed to discuss with me. He was especially unhappy when he heard me call gay rights a civil rights issue, because he did not believe that the discrimination that he had experienced as a black man growing up in the South should be compared to the discrimination that was being experienced by gays and lesbians. Because I really love Charles Lee, I was more patient with him on this issue than I have been with most people. Charles was with me in the classroom. He was with me when I graduated. He was with me when my daughter arrived from Korea. Years later, he stood at the hospital bedside with me as we watched my mother die. Charles was too important to me to let any disagreement end our friendship. He and his wife, Wynette, live in Birmingham, Alabama, and I always spend time with them when I'm passing through. This past year, when our friends Andrea and Jill had moved to Birmingham, it was with some trepidation that I let Charles know that I was in town, but I was going to be staying with Andrea and Jill. And he said, "Well, aren't you going to bring them to church in the morning?" And I said, "Well, Charles, you know, they are lesbians." And he said, "Well, will they be doing something outstandingly lesbian during church?" I compromised and agreed to meet them for lunch after church because you all know Andrea. She might have done something outstandingly lesbian during church. The point being that 20 years ago, Charles, in spite of his excellent education, his long-term experience in civil rights work, was not ready to accept that being a homosexual was not a sin. 10 years ago, he was sort of willing to look the other way. Now, given time and space to let his views evolve, he has repeatedly reached out to Andrea and Jill and called me yesterday to find out why they haven't visited church with him yet. This growth has taken place only because I did not insult his faith or his intellect in the process of his changing. Our mutual love was stronger than our disagreement. And in the safety and security of an absolutely certain friendship, he had the liberty to change and grow, just as I had the liberty to change and grow out of my rural Kentucky prejudices. Charles called this past week after his granddaughter had brought her boyfriend home to visit from college. She is certain that this is the one. The boyfriend in question is white. Charles said, "Roger," that's what he calls me, "Roger, I thought I had all that behind me." He said, "All those years ago, I thought I'd put all that prejudice out of my mind and out of my heart. And now I realize that we need to find some time to talk this through. Racism, prejudice, that all too human inclination towards dividing people, one against the other, doesn't die easily. And typically, it doesn't die very quickly. Nor does it die just because you've intellectually decided that you're through with it. You decide up here a long time before it gets down here. I have prejudices that live inside of me that I do not want. They are demons that are unwelcome. I've locked the doors. I've shut them out. And then when you turn out the lights at night, you can hear them breathing in the dark shadows of the room. Now, it will come as no great surprise to you to hear me say that I do not often cherish the work of the Apostle Paul. The version of Christianity that Paul writes about in the New Testament is, in my opinion, something almost entirely different from the religious teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. I think Paul is very often rigid. I think he's misogynistic. I think he exhibits inexcusable prejudices. And then he will still slip one in there where he will say something that is just really insightful. And I feel like I have to give the boy another chance. One of the ways that people in the first century divided themselves into racial, national, and religious subgroups was by what they ate and how they ate it. In the polytheistic world of the growing Roman Empire, small temples and altars were blended into the marketplace. Most butcher shops were associated, in one way or another, with an altar to one or more gods. So if you went to the marketplace and you bought meat, some part of that animal, largely an inedible part, had been sacrificed to an idol. Many pious people in those days would, on moral grounds, refuse to eat meat that had come from the marketplace for that reason. My father, a World War II veteran, would refuse to ride in a Japanese-made automobile. I have met people in Jordan who would not eat an orange if they thought that orange had been grown in Israel. I do not eat in restaurants that display election signs for Congressman Billy Long. If the owner would vote for Billy Long, how could I have any confidence that their cooking would not poison me? This is a basic competency test. But Paul is being very matter-of-fact in this letter to the church in Corinth. Sacrificing the unusable parts of an animal on an altar doesn't change the spiritual character of either the meat or the people who eat it. That's a fact. The color of a person's skin, a person's nationality, their religion, their sexual orientation is in the end of no consequence. Unless, of course, you think it is. If you think it is, then suddenly it has consequence. Paul is actually fairly evolved on this point. There's no reason to be prejudiced, but he cautions, give your sisters and brothers enough time and safety to get to the same place. I'm convinced of this truth about psychology. People do not often change. And when they do, they don't change much. But they will never change because they've been humiliated or criticized or personally attacked. They change when they believe that they are loved enough and safe enough to have the permission to change. That is the environment in which a person can evolve. Now, this is a tough challenge for us. Our little progressive church exists in many ways for the express purpose of offering an alternative religious view, of being able to say to the universe of magical thinking and superstitious religion and traditions weighted with guilt and fear and neurosis that there is another way of being religious. So our mere existence is a challenge to conservative ways of religious thinking. And that challenge often comes across as being condescending or insulting or dismissive, and is, on the whole, too controversial for an awful lot of folks to accept it. So there's a challenge. How many steak dinners do you have to turn down because someone else in the restaurant believes that a good Christian can't eat meat that's been sacrificed to an idol? How many times do you have water with your pizza instead of the obvious beer because someone at the table thinks that alcohol is always sinful? When do you put your foot down and refuse to go to a Catholic church service because Catholics still won't ordain women? Or to a Baptist or Assemblies of God church because they still condemn our gay and lesbian friends? How do we talk about our progressive faith that is free of supernatural theism, with all of its angels and demons and lakes of fire and streets of gold in the clouds, without making our traditional friends believe that we think they're stupid, even if we do? And now you will hear me say something you do not commonly hear. Where do we draw the line? When do we say that we no longer will tolerate that prejudice or ignorance? Frankly, I do not know. And honestly, I'm afraid that more often than not, I have erred on the side of pushing too hard. What I know from my long-term relationship with Charles is that I was able to grow out of a lot of stupid white Southern prejudice because he was my friend and he wasn't going to let me go. And Charles has been able to grow out of a lot of his stupid heterosexual homophobia because he was my friend and I was not going to let him go. So in the battle between being right and being kind, in the contest between awareness and affection, between insight and being loving, in almost every case, we probably need to assume that being more loving is not just better, but it's more effective than just being smart. I say that not simply because it's incumbent upon preachers to naturally favor love, but honestly, as a technique. It works better. If I could successfully insult my traditional friends into opening their minds to a more progressive approach to religion, I would have done that a long time ago. No one changes when they feel threatened. We can really only grow in an emotionally safe environment. It isn't just that love smells better and makes us feel better, but love is the fertilizer in which we've got a shot at growing. Paul was telling his church friends to love one another long enough to give one another a chance to finish growing up. And that's a message that we can all be reminded of from time to time. You even have my permission to occasionally remind me that I have said this in public.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more.